Okay. I'm Bill Trainer. I'm the dean of Georgetown Law, and this is really kind of incidental conversation while we're taking care of perhaps questions. I'm just delighted to welcome you here. This is our 8th IronTech competition. 6 years we've had it. And so this is really a showcase event for us at Georgetown. One of our real focuses has been on becoming, I think, the premier school in law and technology. And so we started actually this year. Alex Williams joins us as we started the Tech Center, Law and Tech Center. A couple of years ago, we started a Technology and Privacy Center.
These are the ones that
we have courses, a broad range of courses, voting for lawyers. We have a course that our Privacy Center does with MIT on drafting privacy legislation and regulation. It's very much been our focus, but this in some ways is really where it started in terms of our curriculum, the IronTech competition. I'm extraordinarily proud of it. We're delighted with our partnership with Neonatal Logic. But what I'd like to do is just talk for a minute about, I think it's obvious how this fits in our tech focus. But we also have a focus that's really probably more at our core, our social justice focus. Yesterday we had Legal Services Corporation had its annual meeting here at Georgetown, which was really very striking. The administration is trying to defund legal services, and so they always have their annual meeting at the White House, but really wouldn't work at the White House in trying to fund them to have their annual meeting there. So they came to us, and we're a logical place because we're so focused in on access to justice.
Enable editing.
We have just, our clinics. We have the best clinical program in the country. It's focused on helping people in need get legal services that they need. We started the Justice Lab at Georgetown this past year. Professor Ross heads it up to look into research and teaching about access to justice. But I think we're focused kind of at a broader level. The reason why this access to justice problems, lawyers are so expensive. And so you have to be creative and figure out how you address that. One is through coming up with some ways to cut the cost of legal representation. And so Sheldon Krantz is here. He's heading up, I think I saw Mark Fleischecker was here earlier. I really started, Mark is here, started our Access to Justice Pro Bono law firm, in which recent graduates represent people at reduced rates. Very important. But I think also a critical element is the use of technology. You need to thoughtfully use technology in ways that people who are not trained lawyers can give legal guidance. And I think if we're going to address our access to justice problems in the United States, technology is the key. And for me, that's really what one of the signal achievements of IronTech is that students are using neonatal logic to design apps that do legal analysis. And it's already making a difference. If you look at the Virginia Legal Aid website, an app that the students designed a few years ago is on the website, and that's the way that they do intake. Right? So this is this is a great initiative. We're so proud of it. We're proud of it because of what it signals about the importance of technology, because we're preparing our lawyers, our students, to be really the first legal technologists, which is going to be a growth area in the law. But we're also very proud of what it does to address critical access to justice issues. So it's a privilege to welcome you here. Professor Ross is really visionary. So I'm going to turn matters over to her. But I just, it's, we make a big deal. Patrice Lyons was saying, one of our judges was saying to you before, we make a big deal about this. We make a big deal about it because it's something we want to celebrate. So it's really terrific for me to be here and to see you all. And now to turn matters over to Professor Ross.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much.
Bill, who supported this for 6 years from the first time I got here, where I said I want to build a course where students feel back, and he said, go for it. He didn't ask me if I knew how to code, which I don't. So thank you, Bill. I'm going to ask Alex, Alex Gibbons to come up and say a few words about the class, the Institute for Law, Technology, Law Policy, and then I'll describe the class a little bit, and then ask Mark O'Brien and Kevin Malkay, who will both co-teach it with me, to say a few things too. So, thank you.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here and to be affiliated with this. As Tanita mentioned, my name is Alexandra Gibbons. I'm the new Executive Director of the new Institute for Technology, Law and Policy here at Georgetown Law. We started the Institute last fall really to try and create even a stronger home at Georgetown for programs exactly like this. IronTech is in its 8th incarnation, but as the Dean mentioned, we are really doubling down on the intersection of law and technology here at the school. And we wanted to create a central hub on campus where all of those great things can come together. So in addition to supporting the IronTech lawyer competition, we have a great new class launching this fall that focuses on the use of technology in the criminal justice system, for example. Our adjunct professor, Jason Tichet, is here in the audience today. And we're also doing new research and new work in this space. So we are hoping to announce a partnership soon with Catherine Altenader from the Self-Represented Litigation Network. There will be a real hub of research focused on mapping technologies in the access to justice space. In addition to focusing on this area of law and technology, the Institute also works on other tech policy issues. So we do a lot in the world of internet policy, net neutrality, broadband privacy, access issues, intellectual property, the patent system, copyright policy, and the regulation of emerging technology. Our new Georgetown Law Technology Review had their second issue come out today, and it's focused on financial technology. So as the Dean mentioned, Georgetown really is setting itself apart as a hub for this, and using our presence here in DC to try and drive the national conversation forward as we interact with regulators at the agencies and on the Hill about so many of these areas that are quickly transforming the way society interacts today. So I am thrilled that we're affiliated with this, thrilled that we were able to support the competition, and look forward to many more in the years to come. Thank you.
So a few words about the class, for those of you who may not be familiar with how we structure it. We put students together with as teams to collaborate with pro bono initiatives, public and law firms, direct legal service providers, to build apps that increase access to the justice system. You'll see that these are extraordinary apps. The students have built them in 13 weeks. And if you go on our website, IronTechLawyer.com, you can look at them, poke around in them, you'll see what they're good for. And I'm really proud of them. I'm just thrilled with the kind of work that they've done. I'm going to call up the two co-faculty who teach it with me, Mark, and then I'll explain what we're doing here. The technology's working, by the way.
Great. So I'm Mark O'Brien. I'm the Executive Director of Pro Bono Net, and I've had the privilege of teaching this class with Tanita for a few years now. I wanted to just take a moment to shift focus from the technology, which will be very impressive, and the students who will be as impressive as the technology, and just talk a little bit about the service element, which Bill touched on in his remarks, which I think is really important about this class. I was at the launch event for an Access to Justice Center at another great law school in the last week or so, at a really fantastic, very unique research center. But one of the premises that was discussed at that launch event was the idea that people in the access to justice world, legal services organizations, aren't really that interested in how to change what they've been doing for years and years, and that they aren't interested in empirical evidence that would show them how to improve the way legal services is delivered. And thinking about the work that Pro Bono Net does with legal services organizations and direct providers all over the country, I was kind of surprised by that idea that those organizations weren't trying to improve and innovate in their services. And one of the real challenges that they have is sort of a misalignment of what the resources that are made available to them, and often the expertise within their organizations to really meaningfully innovate. And one of the great things about this class is that it has put this group of students with their learning that they have both about the law and about technology in service of organizations that are actually really hungry to find new ways and different solutions to solving the problems of their clients. And so all of the organizations you'll find in the program, and I want to take a moment to just thank them and thank the students for not just their technology work this year, but the human service they've provided to those organizations. So thanks.
Kevin Mulcahy, who's the Director of Education at Neurologic. Is this on? Yes, okay, good.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to meet you in person today. We've had some phone calls, not too many. But on behalf of Neurologic, I mainly wanted to say thank you so much for your professionalism, your creativity, your hard work. It really shows. We're extremely pleased to be part of this program because I'm grateful for what you're doing. I'm going to give you 3 quick examples of the type of things that we just love to see. The first one is Corona. We were having a conversation. You realized what you could do with those variables in the final report, and your head started spinning. I'm going to create an executive summary. I'm going to say this. I'm going to do that. And once he got rolling, he was able to produce basically 1,000 memos in place. And you could hear the excitement in his voice when he realized he had that copy. So that was the truth. Another one was Supreta. You told us you weren't very technical, but over time we saw you really become conscious about functionality. And you wanted this application to be very maintainable for the people who came after you. That was, again, music to our ears, because we hadn't heard it from a lot of lawsuits over the time. Lawyers like to create problems for engineers and scientists to fix, right? But here's a lawyer creating something that will last. That's where we've always wanted to go. Now we've come to. And one more example that kind of represents the great work of this group is Ethan. You attacked this project with so much experimentation and so much refinement that it was wonderful to watch. It was a scientist at work, but he is a lawyer. And the product blends those two sets of characteristics, and I think it's going to be very strong. And your targeted users are going to benefit tremendously from here today. So that's what we're here for, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Thanks.
Some thank yous. Thomson Reuters, who generously sponsored our event. Neurologic, with whom we've had a phenomenal relationship, as you heard from Kevin, since the inception 6 years ago of this program. A wonderful staff who put together this event and did our troubleshooting. Our wonderful PAs, Genevieve, Renee, Terrence Smith, Jennifer Yana, and Angela Kim, who have been working with all the teams and going distance. Let me make sure I haven't missed anyone. Sorry. Okay, so I think I've got everyone. If I didn't thank you, my apologies. Tell me during the break, and I will thank you. Thank you for the organizations who worked with us. It was really special to be able to do these projects with you. To introduce our esteemed panel of judges. David Curl is the Director of Market for Legal Intelligence.
Something like that.
Yeah. Oh, I should say all their bios. When I butcher what they do or their names, their bios are in the program. Okay. Patrice Lyons, who's General Counsel of, this is a Corporation for National Research Executives, and one of our alumna. So it's great to have you here. She's a newcomer. David has been with our program for a while. Catherine Alternator, who is the Executive Director of the Self-Represented Litigators Network. So thank you, judges, for joining us. You should all have a program. The rules are that each team has 6 minutes exactly to present their apps. There are going to be 4 minutes of questions from the judges. Maybe we'll limit it to 3.5 since we're running late. You'll hear about 3 apps. We're supposed to have a 15-minute break, but we'll cut it down to 10 so we can get back on schedule. You'll hear from 3 more, another break, 2 more apps. The judges will deliberate. Meanwhile, at that time, there's a social media poll that will open so that you all can vote for your favorite apps. And anyone out there who's watching us on the stream, which wasn't working a little while ago, but hopefully is working now. And the criteria, which are fairly loose, are in the program too. Let's get this party started. So let's get the first team up. The app is Know Your Rights. I want to make sure as I put your names. Know Your Rights is Sukrita, Sampath Kumar, and Ellie Hansen Matire. Come on up and use the microphones and take it away. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Suprita,
And I'm Eli.
and we're presenting the Know Your Rights app to you today. Every child has a right to education. We want to help them advocate for it.
So we've created an app that guides students and parents through the procedure if the child is facing suspension or expulsion.
We built this app in collaboration with Advocates for Justice and Education, or AJE. AJE is an organization based in DC that provides legal guidance to students and parents of students who are facing disciplinary issues in DC public schools. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve through our app? Many parents are unable to advocate for their child due to lack of resources, limited time, limited education, disabilities, and even language barriers. So AJE wants to reach out to as many students and parents as possible to help them be more aware of their rights, whether it's in a conference at a school or at a hearing before an administrative judge.
So DC public school regulations, they're convoluted, they're complex, and they're written in legalese that's really difficult for the average person to understand. And so we created a step-by-step tutorial that will take the user through the application and through the procedure at their own pace and in a language that they understand. Because a lot of the time, these students are going into these hearings with an administrative judge without legal representation. So we're seeking to empower parents and to empower students to advocate for themselves. So we have a learning platform where there is a step-by-step tutorial, and at the end, there is a final report that the user can bring a printed report or can bring a report on their mobile device to the hearing or to the conference with the school to advocate. So our users are both parents and guardians and students. So because of this, we've used conditional formatting to speak to the user directly. So at the beginning of our app, it asks whether you're a student using the app or a parent or a guardian using the app. And this changes the language that the app uses. For example, if it's a student, then we say your school, or if it's a parent, then we say your child's school. And so by using this customized language rather than a generic the student's school, then we seek to build trust with the user and a relationship with the user. So we have a standard English version, we have a Spanish version that's in the works, and we have a dyslexia-friendly version. And as you can see, the dyslexia-friendly version uses the Comic Sans font. And this is because students with a learning disability are twice as likely as neurotypical students to face suspension or expulsion. And dyslexia is the most common learning disability. And so the way that the Comic Sans font works is that there's a special shape for each letter. So instead of a standard font where there would be like the P, the D, the B, and the Q are all basically the same letter, it's just mirrored or it's rotated. The Comic Sans font has unique shapes for each letter, and it's easier for dyslexic people to read.
Coming to the design of the app, visual design is much deeper than just providing a simple appearance. It determines the amount of trust the user has in the app, the amount of time that the user is going to put in the app. We want to ensure that the user completes the entire app and benefits from all the resources we have for them. We did run a couple of tests with AJE and have benefited from their feedback that helped us improve our design further. We've also designed it in a way that would be easy for anyone in the future to get into the app and improve it from now on.
So we have in-app reports, and so the way that this works is it cuts down the questions and the app reports down to digestible chunks. So the user will answer a few questions, and then they'll get a short paragraph back that's easy to read. And the reason that we did this is because the best way to absorb new information is through repetition, and repetition builds confidence. And so the first time the user reads our in-app report, they learn. And when they read the report at the end, then they remember. And when they glance at the final report as they're advocating to an administrative law judge or to a school official, then they can confidently represent themselves. And this is an example of the in-app learning.
So as I said, we want to encourage the user to complete the entire app. One of the features that we built into the app was the more information feature. So every time a user learns about a certain app, they have an option to get more information by clicking on the more information link. That way they get a preview of what is to come towards the end of the app. Another feature that we implemented into the app was to help the user answer questions that probably have complicated language or legal jargon mentioned in it. For example, in this slide, we have a question where the user is supposed to answer the tier of behavior that the child's behavior comes under. So we have links giving examples for each type of behavior. The user can go through the examples and easily determine what tier of behavior they come under. Okay.
And so at the end, the user can email themselves the report, and they can print it, or they can bring it on their mobile device, including a map of how to get to the Office of Administrative Hearing for students who need to go to that office.
Thank you. So if you don't mind stepping up to the judges, I'm sure they have some questions.
I have one. Yeah. Thank you. That was, I really appreciate you sharing that with us. When I was going through this, I saw disabilities, but then I thought this had a much wider audience, and whether parents would just not use it because my child doesn't have a disability. That concept of disability really is almost a medical concept. A diagnosis would have to be made. In your future work, do you see that it would have more than just disabilities, and you'd present it as a tool that way?
So yes, and one thing that I was that we also looked at with concern that the parent may suspect that the child has a disability, but the child has never been diagnosed. So within the disability question, there's as well as a yes and a no, there's an I suspect that my child has a disability. So a parent can click that and get more information about the rights of a child who has a suspected disability but has not been diagnosed, and what the school's responsibilities are towards that child.
Have you tested this? I understand you worked with the advocates on this, but have you also tested it with any school officials to see how the output looks to them? Does it make sense to them? Is it?
So we haven't tested it with schools yet, but I have tested it with my 10-year-old because we want the language to be a simplified version, and the language needs to be easy for somebody even with a fifth grade education to
Mhm.
to understand.
Mhm.
For the content that you developed, did you develop that independently, or did your partner agency tell you these are the main questions we get? Or how did you come about the decision trees and the content side?
So they gave us an outline of what rules that we should be integrating into the app, and also an outline of what kind of reports we want to give them. We even got a review back from them after we wrote down our content. So yeah, they have been sort of guiding us with what to put in, what not to put in, what rules we should emphasize. So we've sort of built it together.
Thank you very much. So I forgot, first of all, the teams, if you come up here, make sure that the mic was on. So I forgot probably the most important thing, announcement that we have to make at the technology conference. Our handle is on Twitter is GTWN IronTech. This is hashtag IronTech Lawyer. And we're on Snapchat for anyone under 25. And we'll be putting together, I think it's called Snapchat Story. So, can we have the storytelling opportunity come up?
Yep.
It's Marissa Moschel, Anik Banoun, and BJ Alvarez. Wrong team. I'm so sorry. Oh, sorry. Reed Dempsey, Melissa Mills, Sarah Elias. Wrong names. Right team.
Hi everyone, we are Sarah Elias, Missy Mills, and Reed Dempsey. Welcome to the Storytelling app, which we created for the Mental Health Legal Advisors Committee in Boston, Massachusetts. According to the National Alliance of Mental Illnesses, 43.8 million adults experience a mental illness in any given year. These individuals often face employment discrimination, and for those who are low income, it becomes exceedingly difficult to engage attorneys to advocate on their behalf. Due to the limited resources and high demand, this app makes the intake process a lot more manageable and efficient, both for users and for the organization. It allows users to determine their eligibility online, and it allows the attorneys to spend more time with users who are eligible rather than spending a lot of time doing intake themselves. Our app focuses on three main goals, which caters to the needs of our clients. First, it allows for early release of ineligible users. It provides for an understandable and educational process, and it streamlines information and document collection. Today, we will outline specific highlights of our app, but the slides do not reflect our app in its entirety.
All right, this is our first slide. It has a picture that's very welcoming to show that's not just an intake app. It's allowing them to tell their story. So we need a very friendly environment. It also describes very briefly the organization and emphasizes that the more information they tell about their story, the better the app and the lawyer will be able to provide them with assistance. As you mentioned, we have three quick outputs. This is to prevent the user wasting time. So one of our quick outputs is whether or not they live in the state of Massachusetts. If they do not live in the state of Massachusetts, they are not eligible. And so they get a report that describes why they are ineligible, and it also links them to other organizations that might be able to assist them. Our other quick out involves income. Our organization only works with low-income clients who make $30,000 or less a year. Because it might be hard for a person to know their yearly income, we put in for their weekly income, and we have a formula that automatically combines what their yearly income is, and if they exceed that, they get a report stating why they are ineligible. our last output is the most important. Our app has very limited scope to handicap issues, but our organization also does a bunch of other issues. So this report not only links them to other websites that might be able to help them, it encourages them to call the organization to see if this app doesn't pertain to them, but the organization can help them with their own issue.
Okay, so after these quick questions, we ask for some contact information, some information about their employer, and then we move on to this initial question page. So as you see, the first question is, what outcome are you seeking? We're trying to get the client or the potential client to think about their legal problem and to put it in their own words. Before we feed them any questions, ask them to fill out certain forms, we want them to be thinking in their own terms, and that starts here. As mentioned in the last presentation as well, there's a lot of questions that just don't have an easy answer. They're ambiguous, they aren't plain language, and so throughout the app, we've included these hovers on. So here you can see what outcome, and so we talk about some specific outcomes. But later in the app, we talk about what their specific job duties are, what their description is, because it's very important to know that for the lawyers at the committee. Specifically for the job description, we also add why we're asking. Because this is sometimes very sensitive information, in fact, all of it is sensitive information to the user, we want to make sure they know why we're asking and exactly why it's there. As you move into our forms, whether it's a reasonable accommodation problem or another discrimination problem, we've added these status bars at the top. So for each of the forms, the status bar moves across. The idea was that the user should know where they are. They should know how close they are to the end, and they should know that the process is kind of moving along and they're not stuck. We want to avoid users who think, man, this is really taking a long time. I don't know how long it's going to go. I can't do it, and they quit. And so by doing this, we want to let them know that they are making progress and they're getting there. And then finally, we move into our reports. We let them know that they're potentially eligible, that all the information provided will go specifically to the committee, and it fills out specifically any attached documentation. This process is very document heavy, it's story heavy, that's why we're called the storytelling app. And so here, the committee will be able to click all of the specific information and documentation added into the application and pull it all for their use. And even better, the user will get this themselves. So if the committee cannot help them, they'll be able to contact them, let them know, you have all this information together. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to help you at this moment, but we have a ton of people in our network who would. Or you can use this to self-advocate and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really liked the whole concept of it, calling it the storytelling app and giving opportunities, as you say, to either upload documents or to fill in sort of free text. Was that your concept, or did that come from your partner, or where did that idea of approaching it this way come from?
That did come from our partner. I think we had strategic conversations about how this would actually play out, just from kind of a general idea to filling in all the questions. How does it kind of from start to end work? And so there was collaboration in getting to that final storytelling product.
Yeah. The one last thing I want to say is I really liked the progress bar. I think there may have been one other that did this, but this was the one that I found that really useful. I find that every time I take a survey online, I want to know where I am. So that was a very nice feature.
Thank you.
Yes, I like that too. But what disturbed me a little bit in reading this through is that when you're dealing with an attorney, there's presumed attorney-client privilege. So in an intake, to actually have medical records and a great deal of information you're requiring, and this is going to be just sort of an anonymous almost interaction. Why did you choose to ask for so much information, and what happens at the MHL, the Legal Advisors Committee, with that information afterwards? I mean, what security does the actual person have?
So to answer your first question, it is document heavy, and we understand that it seems pretty anonymous. It is an app. However, the process of filing a discrimination claim, especially in Massachusetts, is within 300 days of the action. And it's very important to have the information quickly. At current, a user or an individual would have to call into the center, leave a message, have someone at the center hear that message, call them back, establish a meeting, go through everything. The reason we establish this way is that someone at the committee can get all this information, diagnose it very quickly, look through it very quickly, and come out with a decision about how to best move forward quickly. As far as privacy concerns, this does go through NEOTA. There are privacy backstops, and there is a presumption of keeping the information confidential, and that is within our first 2 slides.
So there wouldn't be anything through this, I understand, is a government group in Massachusetts, the state government group?
Yes, it was created by the Supreme Court.
Right, so usually they would, this would get into too much detail, but relying for, say, NDA-type protection through a private contractor, usually the government would have to provide some assurances. But that's something maybe you could look into going forward.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, and just a couple other questions. And again, the storytelling framing, I love. I mean, getting people to tell their story and getting them to that place in their head that they're telling a story, I think is really helpful to eliciting relevant information that can help people make intake decisions. But as everybody's noted, it is a document-heavy process. Is there a way, and maybe I missed it, to go out and come back? So in case I don't have all my documents, but I do want to supplement, I don't know if I found that when I played with the app.
Unfortunately, not at the moment. But I think it is something that's important to look at. And I think there might be strategic ways to inform before.
Yeah. And then just a quick follow-up. Did you do any user testing with this?
Not yet, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to bring up the AVP resource and intake application. I scared them before because I used their name with different apps. They thought they had to do a different project. Marissa Rochelle, Anita News, and DJ
Last year, there were over 1,000 reports of violence directed toward the LGBTQ community in New York City alone. And that number just represents the violence reported. Many instances of violence go unreported because survivors are often unaware of or unable to access the necessary legal aid services. My name is Anik Banoun, and this is Marissa Moschel and BJ Altvader. And our resource and intake application addresses this very access to justice gap by connecting these survivors with the New York City Anti-Violence Project, known as AVP. AVP provides legal services to LGBTQ community members, as well as resources and training to community providers, a group made up of a wide range of mental health professionals. In order for us to explain how our app works, let me introduce you to Jane, a transgender female who is on a date with a man she met on a dating app. But when Jane gets up to use the bathroom, her date follows her and physically assaults her. In the aftermath of this violence, here are 3 ways that our app can be used to help Jane. First, we'll show you how Jane can connect to AVP through a standard intake path. Second, we'll show you an expedited version of that intake path. And then third, we'll show you how mental health professionals can access resources through our training and information path.
So the next day after Jane is attacked, she goes to see her therapist. And her therapist has been trained by AVP understands the application and knows the resources available to her client. She recommends that her and Jane step through the long form of the application, which opens up with a welcome screen and a standard disclaimer. Then they choose the long form path of the application because there are no time constraints and they're in a safe place. The application then moves to asking a series of questions for some personal information that AVP will need to use to assist Jane as they progress with her case. The information includes her name, email address, how that she would like to be contacted by AVP, her sexual orientation, her gender, and her relationship status. And then the application is then going to go into a series of questions to try to determine what type of violence specifically Jane experienced. And depending on how she answers these questions, it will affect the follow-up questions as the app tries to narrow down on that type of violence. Eventually, Jane gets a question that asks if she met her attacker on a social media platform. She answers yes, and that will conclude that portion of the application. Next, Jane is given the opportunity with her therapist to provide free-form text to explain some additional information that she wants to provide to AVP. And she's also given the opportunity to attach a file to her information. So here, Jane, with the recommendation of her therapist, attach a photo of the injury she sustained to her neck. Then Jane gets 4 questions with her therapist that are going to be used by AVP to determine if there's a special priority that needs to be placed on her case. So Jane clicks yes, she does have an immediate deadline because she happens to have an immigration hearing next week. Jane's then given the opportunity to receive an email of all the information she's provided through the application and is brought to a conclusion screen where she's also provided some links to helpful resources for her case. At the same time, an email is sent to AVP, which provides the type of violence that we think Jane experienced, as well as a priority level for her case, depending on the answers to the questions she provided. Also attached to this email is the photo that Jane attached of the injuries to her neck, as well as a report of all of the questions and answers that she went through in the application.
So now let's consider an alternate scenario in which Jane just leaves following the assault, and she's standing on a subway platform in New York, and a therapist sees her looking hurt and distraught and wants to connect her to AVP. So in this time-sensitive situation, the therapist would use AVP's expedited path, which has a form very similar to the standard intake path that you just saw, except that in this case, the application does not determine the type of violence because that would take too long. So the therapist has to select the type of violence that he or she thinks Jane has experienced. In this case, you can click on a type of violence and see a definition, and Jane's therapist is going to realize that Jane has probably experienced pickup violence and will select that. Next, the therapist needs to select any of the applicable factors that would mean Jane needs immediate priority within AVP. Jane can also attach a similar photo and write a description as with the standard intake. AVP then gets the same email they got in the standard intake. The application can also be used for mental health providers to get more information and resources. And what they would do in that situation is click on looking for information and training, and they're met with a variety of options. They can get immigration information for LGBTQ survivors, they can get safety information and planning tips, or they can also get a glossary of LGBTQ terms. This is what the glossary would look like. There's a number of different LGBTQ related terms. If they click on the term, they would get a definition. And therapists can also have this information emailed to them if they wish. Ultimately, our application helps support survivors of LGBTQ violence who all too often fall through the access to justice gap, and we hope our application helps close that gap. Thank you.
I had one little question, especially in the example of the expedited approach or the expedited path. The scenario was an incident at a subway station or something like that.
Right.
Is this as it's built now? Is it designed for mobile devices?
Yes, it is.
So somebody could go through the whole process on a phone.
And that was a big concern of AVP. They wanted to make sure that this could be used on the go on a mobile device. So
Okay.
yes.
This is very interesting. I found it interesting. If it's a really urgent situation and you have properly trained people, the community providers, and it's the community providers, and anyone can be a community member, I gather from your app.
Yes.
If there's an emergent situation, how do they get through necessarily maybe to the police or something to try to stop it in real time? Or is that not something that would be involved?
Well, of course, we always suggest that if it's an urgent situation and something's happening right now, people call 911. I mean, that's always the first step. But if it's something that just happened and they don't even have time to fill out this expedited path, we leave a number at the bottom. That's an emergency hotline that they can call if they need even faster help.
So that would be part of the training of the community provider.
It's actually just at the bottom of the screen.
So on the actual screen of the app, you'll see the emergency number, and that's the number you call if it is an absolute emergency and you don't even have 2 minutes to go through the expedited path.
So that number would go through to the police or to the project?
AVP has an emergency hotline, so
Okay,
that's where that
fine.
number
And
That is-
ADP would then be able to connect them immediately to where they need to go.
Right. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
And then just a final question again about the privacy concerns. How did you think about those considerations, and how did you envision it was going to interact with the nonprofit?
Yes, this was one of the first concerns that we talked about when we were developing the application with our client organization. And the first concern was us with the information as it was passing through NEOTA and the technology provider for the application. And we confirmed that NEOTA would not be retaining any of the information. It's just passing through on its way to AVP. And then once AVP retained that information, that would fall under their existing procedures for how they're holding sensitive personal information, just like if someone walked in the door and provided the information or called their 24-hour hotline, that they would protect the information in the same way. We also were able, that's where in all the opportunities we would have to provide an email address to have information emailed to them. It was always the option so that if they did not want that, it would be one less place where the information would be stored.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, have the next team get set, 10 minutes, and then we're going to start, we've already started catching up on the time we lost. So please come back in 10 minutes. For those of you who need it, the restrooms, bathrooms are right down the hall and to the left. Okay, so because we continue to have a few technological challenges, we're going to switch two teams. And so we're going to ask the team for ears, elderview signs, and wrists to go last and switch them with the helpline app. So I apologize to the teams and to the judges and those of you who are relying on our order. So now I'm going to introduce the team that's built the British Columbia Justice Navigator, Mohammed Akabanik, David Schifrin, and Tim Tanner. Take it away.
Cool, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Tanner.
I'm David Schifrin. And I'm Mohammed Akavanik.
And we are here to introduce you to our app, the British Columbia Justice Navigator. So before we get started, I just want to give a little shout out and tell you a little about who we worked with. We teamed up with Access Pro Bono, who is a legal services provider in British Columbia, Canada. Access Pro Bono provides free legal services to individuals of limited means. And there's a high demand for legal services in British Columbia. Currently, they operate 112 free legal service clinics, a number that continues to grow. And they receive 25,000 calls from individuals in need each year. So while there's great demand, however, despite these high numbers, Access Pro Bono maintains a staff of only 9 full and part-time employees, and this is all overseen by a single intake coordinator. So Access Pro Bono reached out to us and saw our help in creating an app that would alleviate several issues with their current intake system. Currently, as their intake system works, you call in, they answer the phone, you schedule an appointment, and they determine eligibility. So in order to make this a little bit more efficient, that's why we're here. And so currently, clients, when they are going to their meetings, they are unprepared. Sometimes they'll bring no documents. Other times, people will bring boxes and boxes of documents and expect the lawyers to sift through them. And when they meet with the lawyers, they only have 30 minutes. So we wanted to give the lawyers a chance to better receive this information ahead of time and get to know the clients. So the goal of our app is twofold. First, to help clients prepare for their meetings with the attorney. And second, to allow the lawyers to better understand the client's needs and to help solve their legal challenges. We believe that the British Columbia Justice Navigator accomplishes both these goals. Our app features a client-facing interface that collects issue-specific information and generates both a client-facing report and an intake-facing report. These two reports deliver pertinent information to the client and the lawyer to increase the efficiency of their eventual meeting. The app covers 8 distinct legal issues, which comprise roughly 90% of the issues faced by Access Pro Bono's clients. The remaining 10% is covered by an other category, which generally mimics Access Pro Bono's current intake system. The app is driven by 210 variables, 38 forms, and is designed to be easily maintained. The British Columbia Justice Navigator has the benefit of both being easy to use and easy to understand. The application is form-driven, dynamic, and responsive. As clients work their way through the application and indicate certain responses, the application reacts by asking relevant follow-up questions based on user input. For example, when the client indicates that there are children involved, the application reacts by asking relevant information about the children's involvement. Or if the user indicates that there's a current order or decision in place, the application asks the user to describe the order. So this ensures that the application continues to collect relevant information as the user's issue grows in complexity.
So the core functionality of our app are the 2 reports that are generated, one for the client and one for intake and lawyers. The client report is composed of 4 parts. First, the report analyzes the client's eligibility. APB does not categorically exclude any of their clients on the basis of these eligibility factors, and neither does our app. Rather, the app simply flags a potential eligibility issue and makes the client aware that that might be a reason for ineligibility. Second, the report lets the clients know what relevant documents to bring to their meeting. As Tim mentioned, one of the biggest problems Access Pro Bono was facing was that clients would either come with boxes of documents or no documents at all. Based on the client's responses to the questionnaire, this gives them a succinct list of the relevant documents that they're going to need for their meeting. Third, the report directs Access Pro Bono clients to additional resources for their use and provides a transcript of their session. The British Columbia Justice Navigator also produces an intake report for use by both Access Pro Bono lawyers and intake personnel. In addition to the client information, it includes an eligibility analysis that generally mimics the one on the client report. It also has space for further information to be input by the intake personnel themselves for use by the lawyer. But the real core of our app is this quick summary. As Tim indicated, one of the main problems that they were facing was that lawyers received no information or little information about their clients in advance. This quick summary provides the down and dirty of what the lawyer needs to know in anticipation of their meeting with the client. It includes what the client's issue is, any relevant sub-issues, applicable laws, what laws may or may not apply, and any important dates, either past or future. We hope this will better economize and help ensure more efficient use of the 30 minutes that the lawyer and the client have. Thank you.
Great job. So did you do any user testing either on the client side or on the lawyer side?
So we tested with the lawyers, and we had Access Pro Bono. We actually worked with 8 different subject matter experts on each of the different legal issues and had them run through it and receive their comments and incorporated that into the system itself. We haven't done any client testing yet, though.
Great, thank you.
When you prepare the second report, it goes through to the intake first and then to the lawyer?
Yes. And it has the space for the intake personnel to add, time of meeting and things like that.
And the reason I'm asking that is because the intake then would not be a lawyer.
No, they're typically volunteers.
Would the intake make a decision to pass it along to the lawyer or not?
Yes. And that's why the intake report includes the eligibility factors. They use their discretion to determine who they're going to provide services to. So that little eligibility section goes over the different factors that they consider relevant in making that determination and sort of renders a preliminary determination, may be eligible, may not be eligible. But like we said, we didn't want to kick anyone out of the app at too early of a stage. And so we just sort of indicated a preliminary eligibility.
But would they have an opportunity to appeal that intake person's judgment?
They can always call Access Pro Bono themselves if they have any questions.
And do you have that in your app?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
The thing I liked about this one was the sort of the double report, the fact that it's both the tool for both the client and the organization. The 8 categories of legal issues, or 9 or whatever it was, did they provide the texts that were used in the questions, so that you're working off of their sort of what they would normally do in person?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next team to present is the Helpline app, Rachel Everett, Geneva Hilton, and Brittany Sandler.
Good afternoon. My name is Brittany Sandler, and this is Geneva, and this is Rachel. And we're here to speak with you today about the Helpline app, which we created for the Children's Law Center of Massachusetts. And this is essentially an intake, resource, and referral app. It walks the user through a series of questions, and then it ultimately produces 3 outputs, including a determination report, which includes the best legal resources given the user's particular issue and geographic location within Massachusetts. So we're going to talk about all this in greater detail, but first we're going to tell you a little more about our client, who they are, what it is they do, and how they currently do it. Then we're going to tell you a little more about who the users are and what we identified their needs to be. And finally, we'll walk you through the development and testing of our app, as well as highlight some of the features for you. So who is our client and what do they do? The Children's Law Center of Massachusetts, among other things, they operate a statewide phone helpline. They field about 1,200 to 1,500 calls annually. They're leanly staffed, so they rely predominantly upon volunteers to field those calls. And although they do provide direct representation in some cases, predominantly they provide resources and referrals for the callers based on their issue. And they receive all types of calls about all types of things, but predominantly education. This could be special education plans, bullying issues, and they receive a lot of custody and Department of Child and Family Service calls. So this could be grandparents' rights or children aging out of the system. So this is how they currently do it, using a real live example from earlier this month. The intake volunteers will either listen to a voicemail, which they did in this case, or they'll take a live call. In this case, they received a voicemail from the parents of 9-year-old Oliver. He was recently diagnosed with severe ADHD, but his school denied him a special education plan. And the parents were distraught because the child was consistently being pulled out of class, he was missing out on valuable instruction, and they didn't really know what they could do. So they left a voicemail. The intake volunteer called the parents back, got just some basic biographical information, and here's where kind of the problem is with their current process. There are 14 counties in the Commonwealth. They have a training manual, they have resource binders, but there's just a lot of material. So the volunteers are either inconsistently accessing the materials or not consulting them at all. So often they wait until the weekly intake meeting, as they did here, gave the attorney on staff the rundown of the issue, that staff attorney told the volunteer what the appropriate resources were, and then the volunteer then called the parents of Oliver back and relayed that information. So a great outcome. Here they identified 2 legal issues and great resources, but as you can see, it's very time consuming and there are a lot of extra unnecessary steps. And so our app is designed to cut out much of that. And now Geneva will talk to you about the user.
Thank you. So with our app, there are 2 main categories of users who will be utilizing its functions. So the first group of users are the actual volunteers themselves, and there are about 2 to 4 workers at any given period of time, as well as the actual law center staff members. The problem here, or not necessarily the problem, but
as of right now, that the volunteers only have a very basic understanding of the legal issues as they stand. They're not legal experts, and our app it's not intended to turn them into legal experts. But as you can see, the process as it stands right now, it's very overwhelming considering only 2 to 4 people staff all of those calls, and it takes up much time. The second category of users are the actual callers themselves. The callers can be grandparents, parents, the child, friends of the child, anyone that knows that the child has a legal issue. And they're concerned with the outcome, and right now the process gives them too much runaround. It's call you, you call me back, and we wait for this process. I have to wait for your intake meeting. So it doesn't really get to the solution as fast as we would like it to. So that's what our app is designed for, and these are the people we thought of when we were designing the actual app itself. So once we thought of the user, we thought, what does the user need? And we thought of goals that we established with each other of how we were going to achieve those user needs. So the first goal was to guide the volunteers through the appropriate intake questions. Once they get the app open and they're running through, the app will prompt them for the username, the child information, things of that nature. After that, the system will produce and determine the resources and provide them with the answers in real time. It'll generate a report that will give the volunteer the information to give to the caller. Furthermore, there will be appropriate follow-up. Not every single caller has a report for their specific issue. So if it's that it has to refer them somewhere else, the report will refer them. And then lastly, it generates transcripts and records for the supervisors to check the volunteer work, as well as records for the donors to have. And then throughout the design process, how we actually accomplished this was we made an app that was user-friendly, visually appealing. We also centralized all of the intake binders, the online material, all of the different resources. There are over 14 counties, and depending on the county, that depends on where you're referred to. So we centralized all of that information. After and throughout the entire process, we worked with our experts from the Law Center. We first sent them our design documents, and they sent them back to us with their changes because they didn't really give us a firm structure of what they wanted. So we created what we thought they might help them. They sent it to them, and then once we got back their comments, we then designed our app with their comments in mind. Once the app was ready for testing, we sent it back to the actual users, and they ran through it and gave us their feedback and how things were. And that's how we went back to the drawing board and finished it. And then lastly, we put in place methods for collecting and changing the status of the reports that are generated because the law is something that changes. An additional step that we took throughout this process was to consult a licensed interior designer who specializes in making things for stressful or designing places for stressful environments. And they gave us the color scheme for our app. It's very inviting, it's playful, it's not intimidating. And this is the welcome screen from our app, and you can see that the color scheme matches that. And because our intake volunteers are working on this app for 6 to 7 hours a day, we wanted them to have something that would be easy to look at. And Rachel will tell you more about how the app actually functions.
I think we're going to need to interrupt you with that part. Thank you, but go, if you don't mind, go and answer some questions you guys.
Yeah, no, great job. And I had a question when I went through this. The ordering of the questions for the user or the intake worker, collecting the personal information kind of up front, is that something that is necessary, that level of detail for the intake, or did you consider whether you would flip it and sort of ask other kind of triage questions that would maybe be sufficient to give somebody a basic referral?
We were concerned about that because it's a lot to walk through user through, but unfortunately they required that we ask all of that up front and in that order. And unfortunately we didn't get a run through, but we did break up the screens with reader prompts. So because there's a lot of information after each screen, there's a pause and it lets the user know where in the process they are, what's coming up next. So we tried to break it up as best we could.
Okay, but your client required that. Yep.
Excuse me, I was very interested because I often wondered when they have an app whether it keeps up to date and who's going to do that. So the law changes, well, obviously it does, the regulations and whatever. Would be the intake person that would have to rely on some third party preparing the material to keep that up?
No, so right now how the app works, and we labeled everything underneath the hood of the app, of course. They would only need to, I guess, look at the website that they're referring to, or look at the referral numbers, or any, like, I guess, aspect of the law that does change. They can just go into the system itself, not necessarily the intake volunteer, but it could be a staff member from the law center can go into Neotologic to the reports that are clearly labeled and change the report there.
But if they weren't in Neologic, they were, say, exactly where they were, the Children's Center in Massachusetts, then supposedly there's somebody that would be providing the management with the attorneys to see whether there's a supervision from a legal perspective.
Yeah, so all of the volunteers are overseen by attorneys. So there is a way in which the report is generated that if there's any part of the process that I guess the volunteer is confused about or that they're not sure, the prompt might tell them to go immediately to the attorney, depending on the issue.
Okay, thanks.
I'm good, except one comment is that I like the way you set up the presentation here. You talk about the client and the user first as opposed to the app itself, which I think is a great way to go about designing something like this. So thanks for that.
Okay, we'll call up the job defender, Ethan Plale, Rafi Isanians, and Joe Simpson. And hopefully the video works.
Let's hope. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. We have with us here, this is Ethan, this is Joey, and last but not least, my name is Rafi. And what? I don't know how that got up there.
It's not what you look like.
But nevertheless, we built our application in collaboration with the good folks from Good Jobs Defenders. I believe George is here. They had a rally this morning with Senator Sanders, so they've had a busy morning. Nevertheless, thanks for coming. We'd like to introduce you to our app by introducing you to our friend John. You see, Johnny Boy is a federal government contractor. And he looks pretty happy, but unbeknownst to John, he's actually being exploited at work. You know, they're taking advantage of him. And naturally, it not only affects his personal life, it also affects his work. You see, John is being underpaid. The SCA, or the Service Contract Act, explicitly states how much each employee should be getting paid based on their job description. For instance, a cook 5, which is the same as a head chef, gets paid significantly more than a cook 1, which is somebody who cuts onions and preps the food. These shady employees essentially categorize everybody as a cook 1 or a cook 2 and underpay more or less everyone. They're also overworked. They're not getting the vacation or the health or the fringe benefits they're entitled to, which is horrible. And last but not least, and quite frankly most important, is they're unrepresented either by a union or by a lawyer. So they're all alone. So poor little Johnny gets this great idea. He says, I'm going to go. There's got to be some resource out there. So he goes and he Googles it. He quickly finds the SCA website. It doesn't take him very long to realize that the website is complete and utter garbage. It is so hard to navigate. It is slow. The text is a mess. Everything is in legalese. He can't understand a single thing. So he's left in square one. He's all alone. He doesn't know what to do. You should start feeling pretty bad for John right about now.
And that's why we're here. John, you can stop crying in the corner because we're here to help you, and we're here to help with our application, Job Defender. As our superhero friend Rafi told us earlier just now, John is confused. He's possibly underpaid. He's not getting the vacation he deserves. He's not getting the fringe benefits he deserves. And all he has to do to solve all those problems is go to our website, go to the Job Defender website. It's very simple to do. He can go on his mobile phone or on the computer, and all he has to do is answer a few questions, probably take him 10 minutes at the most. And our questions are designed to be very easily understood by most any service worker. And at the end, it'll generate a report that will tell him whether he's getting the benefits and the pay that he deserves under the Service Contract Act. What's great about this report is we have the option to automatically send it to the U.S. Department of Labor, whereby they, if they do what they're supposed to, they can go out and investigate whichever company it is that John works for. And you can see this very lovely gif of them yelling at them. And hopefully that's what they'll do, because they should. And what's also really good about our app is that it's completely anonymous. John does not have to give any personal information, and so he doesn't have to fear any sort of backlash from his employer. And so his problem solved. And so John and many other contract workers that are being exploited are happy. But not only is John happy, all of his coworkers are happy. Because he went on our site and did the application, all of his coworkers benefit.
I'm going to talk about 3 of the major technical issues that we had to overcome to build the app. First, eligibility, then wage and benefits, and then what is the job that John actually does. So first, we had to determine whether John would be eligible under the SCA. To do this, we had to gather 2 fields, zip code and employer. So John works in DC, and his employer's name is Capital. Using an API, we send this information to usaspending.gov. This is a database of all government contracts that exist. The API will produce back a list of all the employers who have a contract with the federal government, and John just has to simply pick the correct employer, the one he works at, and this determines that he is eligible under the SCA. The next issue we ran into is his wage and vacation benefits. Under the SCA, you get set wage and vacation benefits depending on your job. The problem is over 3,099 different counties are represented in these wage determinations, and there's up to 354 distinct jobs on each of these determinations. A secretary in Ohio will get a different pay rate than a secretary in DC. So we have to make sure that we're matching John to the correct area. To do this, we took all of these different wage determinations and all of these different counties, and we imported them into our app. So we have these 3,099 counties, and we have 354 distinct jobs, and we have over 1 million different pay rates that are possible for this app to produce. The next issue is, in order to know what John should be getting paid, we have to know what his job is. And this can get a bit tricky. A Secretary 1 and a Secretary 2 perform different kinds of jobs. And in order to know what he's going to be classified in, we have to know the actual work he performs. To do this, we created a database of all of the 354 possible jobs, and we then correlated them with all of the counties and all of the pay rates in order to determine the correct wage for John. So we have his job title, we have his location, and from that information, we can determine the correct wage, benefits, and vacation information for him dependent on where he actually works. But there's one more technical thing that's very important, is a lot of these employers don't necessarily have access to a computer or want to do this quickly. So our app is mobile friendly across iPhone, Android, and web browsers on your phone. And it is also available through a normal browser anywhere. Thank you.
Do you want to lead off?
I had just a question here, and it had to do, it's a little technical thing. In your documentation, it said users, in the second group, you'd make the information available to representatives of Good Jobs Nation and other organizations. And in functionality, it again says, and for Good Job Nations and other civil organizations to use to advocate on behalf of the worker. And you mentioned earlier that there was no personal information, but how does that work? You're gathering information from an individual, and you're going to use it not just for Good Jobs Nation, but unnamed groups. And
Yes.
how do you tell people when they use this app that that could be the possibility? Because
Well-
it could have adverse consequences on what's their job even.
All of the information collected on our app is like more meta information, so it has to do with the location and its employer, but there's no personal information that is gathered from our app. They don't put in their name, their email, or any way to contact them. The only way that they can thus get, Good Jobs Nations can get that information is if they choose to reach out with their claim number and additional information. So that's the only way that their identity or their privacy would be compromised.
But oftentimes that's sufficient in order for somebody to track if they really want to know about it.
What information? Just the job?
Well, if you get that kind of information and say you're a baker in a town of 200, and then it's easy to figure out. There's probably not going to be 3 bakers.
Well, it would only be a employer who is covered under the SCA, so only a federal contractor employer. So these tend to be larger operations like kitchens or cafeterias, not necessarily like a shop.
And the Department of Labor won't limit its search to only the baker. It'll do the search for all jobs within that employer. Now, if it's the case that they only employ bakers, it might be a different story, but naturally there runs a little bit of risk in circumstances.
And I think it's just the specificity about what the other organizations are, so somebody knows what they're getting into. So they need to specify what it is. So, anyhow, my thought, just a suggestion.
And did you do any user testing? Do you have an idea of how long it takes somebody to get through this if they're inputting?
We did some user testing, mostly on friends and family and people that we knew in the service industry, so no direct user testing. But typically, it takes about 10 minutes. There's a part where you have to go get your paycheck, so if you don't have that, it may take a few extra minutes, but it's actually pretty easy to get through in a short amount of time.
And would somebody have to complete it in one session, or if you had to go get your paycheck?
At this time, yes. We didn't offer a save feature. I think part of that is because of the anonymity and all that. But yeah, at the future we could add that if we wanted to.
If I may also add, some of the feedback was that the language from the SAA website was too complicated. It's all in legalese, so even the job descriptions. So Joey took on the daunting task of literally going through all 400 job descriptions and changing the words into something that layfolk could understand, which is incredible, I think. So
the dumb work, essentially.
Just one quick thing. This was the one I think that used external data sources most extensively. I thought that was interesting. Tell us about that. How much of this whole project was that just getting that data and making it work with the app?
A large portion of it was getting that data and making it work with the app. There's two separate data sources. One is the API, which is run by the federal government, which is all of their contracts. So I had to figure out how to integrate the API into the NEO platform. And then additionally, in order to get all of this data from the Department of Labor, all the wages and all the counties, I had to build a web scraper that went through all of the Department of Labor's sites and found all of this information and then boiled it down into a format which could be used by the app.
And does that present an updating problem, or will you be able to replicate those same processes over time?
The process is completely replicatable and produces basically an Excel sheet for the web scraping, and then the other process, the API, is dynamically updated and will always be accurate.
Yeah, got it.
Thank you. So we've actually caught up on time, which is amazing. Oh, well, 4 minutes. So we have another break coming up. So take 10 minutes, and we'll be right back with the last two presentations. Everybody, if we could reconvene. We have two more fabulous apps, and then a reminder that we have a reception afterwards. There's going to be great food. So our next app is Wage Theft, Employment Discrimination, and Workers' Compensation Intake Assistant, and it's Karam Hiji, Ermias Abebe, and Lindsay Ware. Go for it.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Lindsay, and to my right we have the wonderful and Karam, and we are so excited to share the 1DC Intake Assistant with you all today. Jumping right in, if this works. So when we were designing this app, we really wanted to make a point of understanding the organization that we were working with and what their need was. 1DC is a DC-based local organization whose mission is really to empower and to mobilize local workers, typically around issues such as racial discrimination and workers' rights, in addition to issues concerning just compensation. But in this effort to mobilize and empower workers, the organization has encountered a problem where oftentimes folks who are interested in joining the organization and helping with their efforts find or face problems of their own in terms of lost wages or if they're being racially discriminated at the workplace. And because of these workplace issues, are unable to participate in 1DC's mobilization efforts. And so that's where the 1DC Intake Assistant comes in. And I'll hand it off to Ern.
So we were ambitious in the sense that our app deals with 3 legal issues: wage theft, race discrimination, and workers' compensation. And each of these issues were highly fact-intensive, and the wage theft laws in particular were highly complex. So we were presented with a challenge. The challenge was to create an app on its face that's user-friendly, but also one in the background that operates with legal complexity to accommodate for all the rules associated with wage theft, race discrimination, and workers' compensation. And I think the brilliance of this app is that it does just that. It takes the complexities of the law and it distills them down into simple questions and answers. And so with each answer, there's a legal rule firing in the background. So to our user, the intake volunteer, or the potential client, what they see on the face of the app are these relatively straightforward questions and answers. But in the background, the app is gathering critical substantive information that's going to allow 1DC to better address the needs of its clients.
Thank you, Erm. So the structure of this is pretty simple. We start off, and we'll run through a demonstration for you all. We start off with a welcome and disclaimer, and then kind of get into some of the basic information, ask things about age, name, and then we get into substantive question. Here's where we break it up into the 3 different categories based on racial discrimination, wage theft, and workers' comp. And based on the answers, we try to then, in a report, cleanly summarize what the potential results or claims that the user may have. And so we'll run through a quick demonstration. Lindsay will take it from here. Okay.
On this first example, we see the introduction to the app. So it welcomes the user and then progresses to present a disclaimer, and then dives right into asking a few basic questions about their name, gathering fundamental information about the individual. Next, we have a sample question series. Here, the user is looking at a set of questions where they ask if they've been treated differently at work, if they feel uncomfortable in the workplace, if they've ever experienced their employer making derogatory statements or the like, to first answer the question of, has this person likely been discriminated against in the workplace? Following that, the system then progresses to ask questions that determine, given the user's situation, what the next best step would be for the user.
And one of the things to mention is that we tried to make it simple for the user. So when we ask certain questions that would be followed up with documentation, we tried to provide that documentation so they could say, okay, this is what it should look like. I have filed this or I have not. So the questions are a little easier to digest and answer at that point.
And finally, we have a sample report page where the user is initially presented with an executive summary for each of the 3 issues that is presented in the app. And scrolling down just to the racial discrimination portion, we can see that the user can very easily go through the questions that they've answered to see the facts and explanations behind the system's recommendation. So thank you so much. We look forward to your questions.
Yes. So on the report, and again, I noted this with a previous one, when you're asked to give your name, like right up front, that seems like that's sort of a hard barrier sometimes, I think, for somebody to get over, like, why should I do that? Did you consider giving like a sample report up front, like to say, if you do this, this is what you're going to get out of this? Or do you only intend it for the intake workers? So it's not meant to be the consumer side. That's the part I was just unclear.
Right. This is intended just for the intake workers to go through. But at the beginning, we also have a small blurb explaining what the app will be doing to welcome the user.
Okay.
Thank you. When I went through, I tried to skew it a bit and go all the racial discrimination. I answered all those questions, just as you would if you want an outcome to happen. But then when I got to the answer, it didn't have racial discrimination. So I must have tripped up on one question or something, and it didn't tell me, and I think this goes with you, it didn't tell me what racial discrimination, a general statement of it would be, but then I noticed when you had conclusion, my question would be, I don't recall right now, did you say you may have this and that? You didn't say you do. You didn't make.
Correct.
May.
Yes. All of our
Gotcha.
solutions are potential.
Okay. But there is that kind of, there was a blank when I had thought and expected to have something coming up.
This was another one where, well, first of all, one thing I thought was maybe kind of a challenge is that the three types of issues, wage theft, employment discrimination, and workers' compensation, as you say, are so different. I mean, it's almost like three apps in one, in a sense, except you're, I suppose, integrating the questions somewhat. So I'd like to hear maybe a little more about what that presented as a challenge in building the app. And I'm not sure I'm clear on where that came from. Was that just the organization's own issues that they wanted to focus on?
So we were given a document specifically for the wage theft laws, or for all of them, but for the wage theft laws were a nightmare to deal with. They were extremely complex. There's so many exceptions to wage theft. It was challenging in that sense. I dealt specifically with workers' compensation and the wage theft laws. Lindsay dealt with the race discrimination, but I can tell you from my perspective, it was difficult dealing with two very different forms of law, but it was for our client. So
It was also interesting because I think for workers' comp and racial discrimination, they're more bifurcated, where first we see if they have an issue in racial discrimination or workers' comp, then it progresses into asking questions that could provide a referral for a certain solution, whereas wage theft is much more complicated with the exceptions, so that made it a really distinct legal issue in itself.
I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thanks. No, I was just curious about that.
Okay.
When you say wage theft, is that in the DC law? They don't have a concept of wage theft, do they?
They do in
They do.
the DC
They
law.
call it
yeah.
theft.
Wage theft, yes. At least that's what it said in the content document.
So that would be, you would base this now on the DC law.
Yes.
All right. That's an odd, I never heard that before.
So our last app, another magnificent project is EARS, the Elder Abuse Signs and Risks, and it's Miles DePass, Chase Osborne, and Taylor Mulligan.
Thank you very much. My name's Taylor Mulligan. I'm joined by Miles DePass and Chase Osborne. And our application, last but not least, is titled EARS, Elder Abuse, Risks and Signs, and was produced for the ABA Commission on Law and Aging with the help of our subject matter expert, Lori Stiegel, who's in the audience today. So before we demonstrate our application, we wanted to give you a little background information. Our application is based on a pocket guide titled Legal Issues Related to Elder Abuse. The pocket guide was created by the ABA Commission on Law and Aging as a resource for law enforcement in the field. The Pocket Guide is a national document that provides information related to elder abuse covering various topics, including the major types of elder abuse, reporting elder abuse, and legal documents related to elder abuse. So for our application, we focused on the main types of elder abuse that are discussed in the Pocket Guide. As you can see here, for each type of elder abuse, the Pocket Guide provides definitions, examples, possible indicators, signs and symptoms, and possible crimes. So our goal was to take this information and turn it into an application that could help a user communicate the signs or symptoms that they're seeing to someone that could assist an older person experiencing elder abuse.
So one of the great things about our application is that it's compatible with a number of different types of users. Almost anybody that's concerned with elder abuse can find a purposeful use for our application. So there are essentially two paths you can be taken down when using the app. The first was designed for those who are familiar with different types of elder abuse, such as law enforcement or other professionals who deal with elder abuse. The second path was designed for those who are unfamiliar with different types of elder abuse, such as elders or members of their family. So I'm going to quickly describe the first path in which the type of elder abuse is known. The user will be prompted with different types of elder abuse, which could range from physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, abandonment, neglect, financial exploitation, or self-neglect. And then once they select those specific types, they'll be prompted with different signs or symptoms within each of those types of elder abuse. And then the report will then organize and summarize the information that the user has provided. So we're going to give a quick demonstration of this path. The user selects yes, they know the type of elder abuse the victim may be experiencing, and then they select the types, sexual abuse and neglect, and then it will go into the different signs or symptoms for each of those types. So sexual abuse, they chose 2, and neglect, they chose none of the above. And then the report will generate, it will summarize the signs and symptoms they've selected. It will give them information on each of the types of elder abuse they chose, give them information on what they should potentially do next, and also provide some other resources at their disposal. So even if the user knows the type of elder abuse the victim might be experiencing, so for instance here, if they choose abandonment, they might not see the particular signs or symptoms that they've observed. So then they can choose none of the above, and a different report will generate for them that warns them that abandonment may still be occurring, even though they haven't seen the particular signs or symptoms that they originally observed, and that they should still take the proper precautions and next steps. And Chase will now go through the second path you can go down in the application.
So our second path is kind of designed for people who don't know about types of elder abuse. So what we wanted to do is aggregate all of the signs and symptoms for elder abuse and kind of organize them in a way that they can be presented to those types of people and kind of what they're observing, what they're seeing, and then produce the results of what type of elder abuse they're actually seeing. And then depending on what they put in, it's going to put out an output that says the specific types of elder abuse, the other information, and then the kind of same report. So we can go through the path here. Now the user is going to select no. And then what it's going to do is it's going to provide those signs and symptoms organized by physical attributes, emotional, financial signs, treatment or care, home living, and self-reporting. And they can select each different type. And then ultimately what we're going to see on the report is the signs and indicators of each different type of elder abuse. So we can see that they selected X number of physical abuse. And then it's also going to produce those same type of reports individualized to the elder abuse that also lets them know what other types of elder abuse they should be on the lookout for. But if the user decides not to put in any of the signs or symptoms or doesn't see any of the signs and symptoms, it also offers them the ability to select different types of elder abuse and learn more about those. From this, if they select each type of elder abuse, it will produce that same report, giving them the signs and symptoms for the type of elder abuse. And based on our use with the app, based on having other users use the app, such as police officers, other lawyers, members of the ABA, we really think it's going to help organize the information of the Pocket Guide into a hands-on tool that a user can use. They aren't kind of sifting through the Pocket Guide. They can select exactly what they're looking for. It also encourages them to report the elder abuse. That's a critical part of any time you ever believe there may be elder abuse occurring. You want to make sure there's reporting. It also indicates the possible crimes. This gives people a chance to kind of translate what they're seeing into what they should be reporting. And finally, it also provides them with all the resources they need to take the next steps once they're, now that they're aware of the elder abuse involved.
Thank you.
So I understand it's a national format that, you're taking that guide from the ABA. Could you talk a little bit about, though, if local jurisdictions wanted to customize this, how much of a lift do you think that would be for them in on the resource generation side?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely, we actually made this presentation at the ABA's commission meeting last week, and that was one of the things that they thought this could be an excellent tool for particular police precincts, that they can have this kind of reporting and then go back. So a police officer in the field is just plugging in exactly what he's seeing, and then it goes off back to his precinct. He doesn't really want to deal with it, but the appropriate resources are there for them to use. So we think it definitely is something that can be used individualized. Now, with elder abuse, you need to make sure you're individualizing it to the particular jurisdiction, because this is, like you said, a very broad-based, and that's kind of how we wanted to keep it. We wanted to make sure it's very broad and very national use, but it's something that can definitely be quickly changed into a situation where it's, instead of producing the report back to the user, it's emailing the report back to their precinct.
Perhaps this adds, I had a thought that sort of leads on from yours, and perhaps this was what you were also interested in, is that this is the federal guidance from the American Bar Association, but the outreach to the local groups, for example, there's the laundry list of the URLs there at the end, whether or not those are just governmental type groups. I think some are private, but if there's local similar bar associations having an interest in this issue, perhaps you could actually have an outreach to them in a different way than just a list of URLs, so that the state and local level.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the next steps for this tool. I think this tool is really going to be good and useful on the ABA's websites, but I think that's where you could have those local jurisdictions kind of taking the reins there and kind of taking the model of the app and then producing it for their own purposes.
But and also, in addition, the app could also have a reference, what state are you from?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the things we wanted.
Intelligence behind it.
That was one of our initial ideas. The problem is then you're really getting into the weeds on giving legal advice into the states. And we didn't necessarily want to be in a position where we're giving legal advice on state-specific laws. We wanted to make sure that they're getting a broad background, so the people can then translate that into what they need to do, the next steps on who they need to report to.
Yeah, and this follows a little bit on that, and it's more of a comment rather than a question, but I think this strikes me as the one in the mix here that was kind of more about the facts than about the law. It was, and I think with apps like this, we tend to sort of reduce factual questions to yes or no, or, more clear-cut statements, or on the other end, sort of more open-ended questions, tell us your story, for example, as we saw in one of the examples. But this one I thought was useful because it gives you a way to sort of articulate the facts. It gives the user a way to say, yeah, these 3 symptoms, and maybe that adds up to abuse, and that's worth pursuing. Or, it just sort of helps the user, I think, sort out their understanding of the facts. So I thought that was an interesting aspect.
Absolutely, yeah, and that was one of our goals, is that users that aren't really familiar with elder abuse, they're seeing the signs of abandonment, but they don't know that that's abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
This app allows them to plug in those signs and then get the report back and say, oh, this is abandonment. Oh, we should also be on the lookout for these signs and symptoms.
Right. Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, so 2 important announcements. First of all, social media poll is going to be live on IronTechLawyer.com. So go on IronTechLawyer.com and vote for your favorite app. And for those of you who are watching the stream, you should be able to vote as well. Second, equally important announcement is that our food for the reception is all set to go in the back. So help yourself. We're going to ask the judges to deliberate for 15 minutes and come back and tell us what their awards are. The judges are ready to announce their awards, the moment you've all been waiting for. And I'm going to hand it over to David Curl.
Thank you, Janina. I really regret being the spokesperson for the judges, because this was really hard, and we argued back and forth quite a bit. Is this one better? I just want to start with a couple of general comments first. As the dean said up front, Georgetown makes a big deal out of this, and I think that's good. I mean, this is a really interesting and fun competition. I think it should be a big deal should be made out of it. And there's just one observation that we were talking about at lunch, and I wanted to just get off my chest about all this, is that a lot of these apps are designed to help people deal with legal systems that are broken and or not functioning very efficiently or not functioning well. And it's great that we've got law students and others working on this stuff to help people navigate those systems. But let's not lose sight of the fact that as lawyers, we also have a responsibility to help fix the systems that aren't working very well in the first place. So thanks for the back. So I'll get off my soapbox now. We'll just one thing we wanted to say about kind of an overall criteria that we had is that we noticed that of the ones we're choosing to recognize, they happen to be the ones that also seem to us to be ready to go to market, ready to be implemented right away. And I think that had something to do with our judgment of them. And of course, we also want to say it was really hard to pick among them. They were all really good and really interesting. And each one of them had something that we found was very compelling and interesting and creative. So, having said all that, we are choosing as the IronTech Lawyer winner the AVP app. And well, the things that we liked about this one in particular was that it was obviously responsive to a need and a system that's already in place in the world out there in the world and could be immediately implemented and go to work. The design aspect that we liked was this idea of having an expedited path and a more standard path. We thought that was very creative. Made a lot of sense in the context of the types of legal issues that were presented. We thought the presentation was outstanding. And again, this is the one that we felt of all of them was most ready to go, most ready to be put to use in the marketplace or in the real world right away. So, thanks a lot. Oh.
Sorry about that. I know the suspense.
Where's the camera? There it is.
There's a couple. The paparazzi. Great. Thank you. Congratulations, guys.
Yes.
Okay. There's a second award that's called the Excellence in Design Award, and you can think of it as a second place, but it's well, I'll just go right to it. It goes to the British Columbia Justice Navigator, and then I'll talk about why. And the things that we liked about this had to do with the design and concept of having something that was dual-facing, that was both useful to the client and to the intake staff. And that made a lot of sense. It made a big difference, I think, in the way the whole thing was executed, and we thought it worked very well. So thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great job, guys.
And we've got two honorable mentions that we'd like to note that had specific aspects that we thought were quite interesting. And the first one goes to EAR, and these are all acronyms that I can never remember. The EAR app, which was the elder care one. Are they coming up? Do they come up too? Yeah, come on up.
Come on up.
While they're coming up, I think that one of the main motivations for this one was that they had the advantage in a way of a really thorough document to work from, the handbook, but we think they really made the best of it, of leveraging that into a very readable, usable app. And then, as I think we said, it was interesting in the sense that it focused on the facts and not the law. And that was a good help to people taking their first step into their legal problems.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Pardon me while I get the names of these ones right here. The second honorable mention goes to the Children's Helpline app. Which was for the... And should also mention, this is the one that got kind of cut off, so we're sorry about that. But the thing that was compelling about this one to us was this was really a compelling problem that you're tackling. People who are kind of in not a great position to deal with what was a real concrete problem, and there was a good connection to the legal documentation, and then also the point that was brought up on the questioning about the flexibility in the app for updating in light of new changes in the law or other documentation that comes along. So those were the reasons we decided on honorable mention here.
Great. Thank you. Congratulations.
Janina?
Okay, so the social media award goes to Job Defenders. Now, unfortunately, so some of you may be wondering what I've been handing out. One of the greatest technologies ever invented, the book. But because we had two honorable mentions, I owe you some books, and they're great books, so I owe you some books, which I have plenty of at law school. So congratulations. Well done, well done. Great, so just by way of closing, all of you were just phenomenal. It was great to have you in the class. I'm so proud of you. Your TAs are so proud of you. Whoever's watching on the stream is so proud of you. And for those of you in the audience who want to actually see the apps run through the apps, they're all online at IronTechLawyer.com. And thank you so much for coming. And continue eating and socializing, and it's a pleasure having you.
Well done. Thank you.